What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like it in Magic, and whether you like ramp or sweepers, maybe big boards full of creatures, free spells, big beaters, or planeswalking elite-ers. We had something going there for a second, didn't we? This deck has all that, so just open up the gate and come on in. 5 color gates today, right now in fact. Let's go. And we're back. Now, I am especially proud to present this one today because this is kind of, first of all, a baby of mine. I'm working on this one for a while, and I seriously think it's the best deck I'm going to show you all season. Like, just put all my chips in the bag right now. I think this is probably the best deck I've shown you in literally months, and it's yielded ridiculous results for me. So, let's talk about the best standard Gates deck that ever existed. And by the way, it's rotation proof. I know that's a really big statement. I usually don't go that far when I'm talking about decks, especially like Rogue Brews, rotation-proof decks and stuff, but I have a lot of faith in this deck to be one of the better decks come autumn when things do rotate out, and I don't know what's going to be enthroned. Nobody does, right? But just from what I can tell about this deck right now, it is really powerful and has won a lot of games over the last 3 weeks while I've been playing it, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Gates first. Let's do things a little bit differently here because the gates are technically some of the most important cards in the entire deck, and we're playing a lot of lands. This is a land-based deck, so I should probably go ahead and show you those first because they're half the deck. We're playing 29 lands in this deck. Stick with me. Let me talk about the gates first real quick. Now, sorry I have to whip out notes. There's a lot of lands. I apologize. There's 3 Gruul Guildgate, 3 Azorius Guildgate, 2 Izzet Guildgate, 4 Simic Guildgate, 2 Selesnya Guildgate, a Dimir Guildgate, a Boros Guildgate, and, just for good measure, a Gateway Plaza to round out the gates. Now that is 17 gates in all, and once you add in the forest, the mountain, and the island that we're also playing, you get a total of 11 blue sources, 10 green sources, 8 red sources, 6 white sources, and a single black source, again for good measure. Nailed it without looking at the notes, pulled it off. Now the numbers for the sources actually don't count that Gateway Plaza, nor did they count the 4 copies of Plaza of Harmony that we're also playing in the deck. So we really stretch our mana well with both Gateway Plaza and this is nice against aggro too, where every little bit of life counts. And most of our games go long anyway, so even against like not aggro, our life really counts too, so Plaza of Harmony does some really nice things for us, but so does the 1 copy of Blast Zone that we're playing. We have multiple ways of getting this back from the graveyard once we do use it, so sometimes we can activate this 1 Blast Zone 2, 3 times in a game. I've done it before, and there's plenty of things this is amazing against. There's a lot of aggro decks that want a bunch of 1-drops right now. It's awesome on 2 against the Cavalcade of Calamity deck. Against this mono-red Chandra's deck, we're actually able to pick off 4 different things, get a 4 for 1, and have 3 different permanent types destroyed by 1 Blast Zone. So this just does all the labor that you need in the deck, and it's kind of a sweeper that's more or less uncounterable. We've even taken out like a 6-mana Chandra with this during testing, so this is just yes to Blast Zone. Play at least 1 copy of that, but it's actually not the most important land in the deck that we haven't talked about yet, as a matter of fact, because I saved the best for last. We are playing 4 copies. You probably sniffed it out by now. 4 copies of Field of the Dead in the deck. The old bait and switch. That's right, it's a Field of the Dead deck. Sorry, but I actually think that in the upcoming format, the Gates shell is going to be one of the best shells for Field of the Dead, hands down. For one, the mana base is just conducive to Field of the Dead. I mean, we're playing like 1 of a bunch of basic lands, 1 of a couple of guild gates, 2 of a couple of guild gates, 1 blast zone. I mean, it's just a cinch to get 7 different lands with different names on the battlefield all at the same time. Plus, we got a bunch of different ramp stuff in this deck, so we were able to get to Field of the Dead really, really fast and just fill the board with tokens. And we have multiple ways of doing that in this deck, just getting like huge turns that last forever that get us a bunch of tokens all at one time. And especially once you get multiple Field of the Dead out, it's kind of only a matter of time. You have a never-ending creature factory, because again, there's 29 lands in this deck. You're pretty much always going to have a land to play. Plus, there's lots and lots of ways to draw cards or play extra lands in a turn, so there's just no shortage of 2/2s you can put out once you get a Field of the Dead, or 2 or 3 or even 4, as has happened plenty of times while I was playing this deck. It's not unheard of to get all 4 out, and then it's pretty much curtains. But even 2 is often way too much for an opponent, and this deck has the chops to go long. So if the board gets swept a bunch of times, even if you have to sweep the board a few times, you kind of don't care because you know that you're going to have an easier time getting back on board than they are. Well, we finally made it to the main deck, everybody. We did that together. Let's celebrate ourselves. And Ziggy's here. Everyone, you can't actually see him. Here he comes. Any second now. There's his big fat tail. Hey, buddy. My cat loves me. Anyway, it turns out that a lot of the cards that pay off gates also kind of help support Field of the Dead in various ways. So let me go ahead and talk about these. First of all, we're going to play 3 copies of Circuitous Route. Not only does this let us go get more gates to put out, but it also lets us get 2 Field of the Dead triggers right then and there, which is really sweet. So if we have multiple Field of the Deads out, suddenly we just get like 4 zombies. That's just ridiculous. And of course, Route goes and gets whatever 2, basics or gates that you want, so it really helps you get to those 7 different lands that you need to start proccing Field of the Dead in the first place. So card really sits at the intersection between the 2 strategies really well, Field of the Dead and gates. I mean, you're going to play this card in either strategy anyway, so it just makes sense that you'd play gates with Field of the Dead because this card is so good in both strategies. Same thing goes with Guild Summit. It turns out we're playing 3 copies of this too, just like Circuitous Route. I cut it down to 3. Well, I was playing 4. Turns out in a deck that draws this many cards in this many ways and goes this long into the game, you actually don't need 4 copies of this because sometimes they'll just rot in your hand if you already have a copy or 2 out. You don't want to play a 3rd one because you don't want to deck yourself. That's right, decking yourself is a very real consideration in this deck, but that's kind of the good kind of problem to have. To see nearly your entire deck in a lot of games with this monster, so you just don't really need 4 copies of this card. That said, it is a really important card for the deck because it's pretty much the best card draw engine we could ever hope for. And again, this goes nicely with Field of the Dead. Not only does it help you draw into the other gates and lands that you need to get those 7 different lands, but once you have Field of the Dead in place and ready to proc off, then just playing a land will sometimes draw you into another land. At that point, you can play an Arboreal Grazer, Growth Spiral, whatever, we'll get to them. Start dropping more lands, or maybe you'll draw into a Circuitous Route to get more lands, and when those gates come into play, you'll get more guys, draw more cards. It just starts getting crazy, because at a certain point in the game, gates will proc both Guild Summit and Field of the Dead, and that can get out of control like super fast. But I'm also on 4 copies of Gates of Blaze. Now, it might seem a little counterintuitive to play Gates of Blaze in a deck that's trying to put 1,000,000 zombie tokens out. But it turns out that we don't do that until relatively late in the game. I mean, we might start getting zombie tokens as early as turn 5 in this deck. It's not unheard of at all. But at the same time, we won't start getting a lot of zombie tokens until a turn or 2 or more after that. Sometimes the game has to go on for a good long time before you can put yourself in the position you need to be in, and Gates of Blaze is a really integral part of securing that position and buying us time to get to where we need to be in the course of a given game. So against aggro decks, this is just an insanely important card, and we have plenty of ways of casting this multiple times in a game or just drawing into it if we need it. Alright, now you've already seen the Circuitous Route, but this is kind of a ramp deck. We're playing more than just that in terms of getting more lands on the battlefield. And that is what we want to focus on when it comes to our ramps. So we're going to start with 4 copies of Arboreal Grazers. This is just a really good card. This is another one, though, that you don't necessarily mind sweeping off the battlefield with the Gates of Blaze, so long as it's done its job and put an extra land into play on one of your turns, and even blocked for a couple of the early turns. It's very, very good at doing that against aggro right now. And remember that this has reach, because your opponent almost never will. For the most part, we just need a 1-drop that we can get down early and goes ahead, puts another land out, because again, we're trying to get to as many gates as possible. We're trying to get to 7 lands as quickly as possible. Now, to that end, I'm also playing 4 copies of Growth Spiral in the deck. Sometimes we won't get this until turn 3 because, again, we're playing a lot of tap lands. I get that, but this is still going to accelerate you. And cards like Arboreal Grazer or Growth Spiral, actually in a Gates deck, have the effect of catching you up to where you should be in terms of mana in a given turn. It actually helps you curve out a little bit more easily starting on the next turn. So keep that in mind, but it's also a pretty sneaky way of putting tokens on the battlefield during your opponent's turn, which will be important a lot of the time. Either your opponent's going to attack in on you, so you can Growth Spiral right then and there, get multiple zombies if you have multiple Field of the Dead, and draw drop a land off your growth spiral. So keep that in mind. Dropping a land in instant speed is awesome when you have Field of the Dead. And sometimes you'll even wait until the end of your opponent's turn to play growth spiral, drop a land, and get a couple of zombies so that you can ensure an attack and, you know, get through sweep or sorcery speed sweepers and the like. So there's a lot of reasons growth spiral and Arboreal Grazer are important in this deck. Not to mention, by the way, the fact that sometimes, especially cards like Grazer, but the same is true of growth spiral, are pretty bad towards the middle and end of a game because you're out of lands to drop in your hand. Growth Spiral is a little bit better because it might draw you into a land, but that's not always the case. But in this deck, we draw enough cards off of Guild Summit and in a couple of other ways that we'll have a fully stocked hand a lot of the time and plenty of lands to drop with an Arboreal Grazer or Growth Spiral, even on like turn 8. So they're a little bit better in this deck than they usually are. But how to fill the rest of these slots? Well, it turns out it's pretty easy. First of all, 4 copies of Teferi Time Raveler. Hate to do it to you because I know you probably don't like this card. Not many people do, but it turns out we gotta have it. Now, first of all, this +1, very, very important in this deck because it allows us to at least play Circuitous Route on the opponent's turn. Just like playing Growth Spiral on the opponent's turn, this can sometimes be really important if it's during their combat step or at the end of their turn. Again, you can get through sorcery speed sweepers by being able to cast that route at the end of your opponent's turn. That's really important, but also allows you to play instant speed Gates of Blazes and stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff about that +1, and it makes sure control decks don't stop your steez, and that's really important in a format full of not only like Esper and Grixis and counterspell decks, but like even Simic Flash. I hate that deck. I just want to get through counterspells, and sometimes one Teferi will completely ruin that deck. Like we were playing against Temur Flash in this game, and they basically just scooped to the presence of a Teferi. Teferi is also important for just getting big creatures off the battlefield, and it can target like artifacts and enchantments and stuff too. Really wish it could target planeswalkers, that'd be broken, but no. Mostly, we're going to use this for tempo in the early game, take a big thing off their side of the table, draw a card of our own. That's a really important part of it too. And really, even if it just dies right after that, not a big deal. We can get it back from the graveyard in a way later on in the game. So there's lots of different uses for Teferi in this deck, whether it's casting stuff at the end of your opponent's turn or during their combat step, or just like, you know, making sure they don't cast counter spells like a weasel. That's nice too. So, or just again gaining tempo. Teferi does it all. We need it in this deck. But we're not quite done with Walkus, because we're also playing 2 copies of Tamio in the deck, and she is the dang old glue. It turns out that we need Tamio. At first I just started with 1 copy of this. We need 2, because sometimes getting cards back from our graveyard is going to be the absolute most important thing that we can be hoping to do at any given point in the game, because again, we want to be able to get back those Gates of Blazes and sweep the board more often. Circuitous Route to get more card advantage, basically, you know, when it comes to Field of the Dead, Guild Summit. Just getting 1 Circuitous Route back can mean just this huge difference because it effectively creates an enormous amount of card advantage. Same thing with Teferi. Sometimes we want to get that back from the graveyard. So there's just a ton of stuff sitting in our graveyard that we want out in the later game to really help us cinch things up. So Tamio's good at that. Or she can just find a card for you in the first place. Looking for that Gates Ablaze or something, as you often are. If you haven't found it yet by the time you cast Tamio, she can help you draw into it. That's an important part too. Plus, there's more. While she's sitting on the battlefield, you can't be Thought Erasure, and that's freaking enormous for this deck. So yeah, 2 copies of Tamio at the very least. There's also a Lava Coil, by the way, just 1 Lava Coil in here because we're having a little bit of trouble against aggro in the first place. I wanted another 2-drop in the deck somewhere, so I cut back on a Guild Summit, threw in a Lava Coil. There's a Lava Coil in here. Now back to big, huge, important stuff like the 4 copies of Hydroid Crasis. Another way that we're going to draw a bunch of cards in this deck. Sometimes we either draw into the Guild Summit, or we already have the Guild Summit out. We, play the Hydroid Crasis, draw 3-4 off of it, drop a gate, drop 1 off, draw 1 off of it, or draw the second Guild Summit, whatever. So we'll draw into the Tamio, the Gates Ablaze, whatever. Sometimes that can be a really hot 1-2 punch. It's just playing a big Hydroid Crasis, like a 6-6 Hydroid Crasis, drawing into the Gates Ablaze, and then killing everything except for the Crasis. That's happened on multiple occasions, but sometimes even if you end up killing your Crasis with the Gates Ablaze, again, you don't care. So long as you don't die, because you just gained a bunch of life, drew a bunch of cards. Doesn't matter if the Crasis died. You probably drew into another Crasis, something it's very good at doing. So it's just a really important card to help us sort of turn the corner against aggro decks, put a huge thing out. It's going to win us the game a lot of the time if Field of the Dead doesn't do it. We need a big flying creature to do so. Hydroid Crasis comes in, saves the day. So, it's a ramp deck. Why wouldn't we play just the best ramp card in Standard? But we're getting close to the end here. There's just a couple more one-ofs to talk about in this deck. Because I'm just playing one copy of Gate Colossus. I'm not actually sure that we even should do that, but I just can't play Gates without playing at least one Gate Colossus, so here we are. And I really don't think that we need any more copies of this. In fact, I'm thinking about coming down a copy. Usually Field of the Dead is enough, but just like hydroid Crasis can do, sometimes it's nice to be able to go tall instead of wide, and just take giant chunks out of an opponent's life total, and Gate Colossus is pretty good at doing that, and it's fantastic against control opponents that have a bunch of removal or counter spells, because you can usually get multiple castings of a Gate Colossus in a game, and late enough, it's going to be totally free to play, so we kind of might as well play it. You know, if we play a Gate, and we have a Gate Colossus in the graveyard and guild summon it out, then we can just draw the Gate Colossus, which is also really, really sweet if we can play it for free. The game's going to go long anyway. Why not get free Gate Colossus a few times? But finally, when they go high, we go low. Tireless Pilgrim. Tireless Pilgrim. The country really came out of me right there. But anyway, I have run across decks while testing this deck that play like at least 3 copies of this card, because that's how many I saw them play. And I just don't think that we have to do that. 1 copy is usually enough. If we land it, then we go get a Field of the Dead, start procking off, even if we already have a Field of the Dead. Sometimes this will go get the 4th Field of the Dead, so that's nice. You can get out of your graveyard with Tamio if you Gates Ablaze it, or if they kill it or something like that. It's really not too big of a deal to get this back from your graveyard at some point in the game and go get another Field of the Dead, whatever you need to do. But this can also just cast free spells, whoops, and it's really good. Like, there's this game where we got like a Circuitous Route and a Teferi and a something else, I think a Gate off of this activation. That's just nothing but business. So late in the game, you're going to have all of the mana in the world, and that's the whole reason, by the way, why there's one Dimir Guild Gate in this deck. There's a Gateway Plaza, because sometimes we'll need the black mana. It's not too hard to get with Circuitous Route, right? Sometimes we'll need the black mana to activate a Golos, but when you can, free spells are obviously very nice. So Golos is just an absolute slam dunk, but I really don't think we need more than one. Are we going straight to the sideboard? Feels weird. Usually the lands are here. Having a crisis of conscience. Just do it. Roll the sideboard. Here's the sideboard, everybody. Here's 3 copies of Negate, 3 copies of Fry, a copy of Time Wipe, 2 Prison Realm, a Jace, 1 copy of Chandra, 2 Mass Manipulation, and an Ether Gust. Now let me run through these real quick. Negate, again, just a no-brainer, right? I mean, we're going to try to side in against control decks. We definitely don't need the Gates Ablaze. We can come down to Growth Spiral and a couple of other cards. So we have a few open sideboard slots. For control specifically, and Negate obviously goes in, but Fry is also much better than Gates Ablaze in those matchups, so we'll play 3 copies of it. And remember, again, Tamio is awesome for getting any of this back from your graveyard, so you can get multiple castings of any of these spells. That's why I don't feel like we need 4 Negates. We can free up sideboard slots for other stuff like Time Wipe, which is one of the few cards that we're going to play outside of that control matchup once we get into game 2 and 3. But Time Wipe is just nice because we need an extra sweeper, and there are going to be games where we can return a Golos to our hand and sweep the entire board, and that is a huge play. So at least the 1 copy of Time Wipe, because I wanted another sweeper, and I didn't want to commit to double black for Ritual of Soot, Cry the Carnarium, but you could go like Flame Sweep or something here. I just wanted something that killed everything. So I went with Time Wipe. A couple of copies of Prison Realm. This mostly comes in against Planeswalkers, and in matchups where you have to kill like one big creature that it's difficult to kill with Gates Ablaze early in the game. Sometimes you'll come across those matchups. Prison Realm is perfect for those, and the Scry is nice too. As far as Big Chandra, again, against control, that can just put them on a clock. And against other Field of the Dead decks, it's nice to be able to put them on a clock too. There's a bunch of different decks that go really deep into the game right now, and it's going to probably stay that way after rotation. Things look more and more mid-range. As time goes on, the more we are able to analyze what the format's going to look like after rotation, things look more and more mid-range. So Chandra is a great way to put a clock on people, and it's a sweeper too, so it's like playing, you know, a 6th sweeper in the sideboard. There's also Mass Manipulation, though. You can kind of count this as a sweeper as well. This is another really effective way of taking out Planeswalkers and other permanent types that we don't have all the game against in game 1. Again, read Planeswalkers is mostly what this is for, but there's a few decks that rely on just getting 1 or 2 big threats out, and Mass Manipulation is also awesome against them. We're going to have all the mana that we'd ever want in the mid and late game, especially the late game, so why not play Mass Manipulation in the board? Ether Gust is just an all-around good card against decks that we're relatively bad against. So I ended up playing that as just a one-of here. But finally, I really saved the best for last here. The Jace. Now, again, there's going to be multiple games we have to worry about decking ourselves. So Jace comes in handy in those games specifically against those decks where we know, again, that games are going to go super long. And again, there's a lot of grindy matchups like that, whether against mid-range or control right now. Just landing a Jace will turn an almost certain loss to decking ourselves into a guaranteed win. Now here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 68, which is a pretty darn high score, especially for what you're paying for this deck. I mean, this deck's not budget or anything, but it is about 165, 170 on TCG Player right now. Less than $200 is really, really good for what you're getting. In my experience with this deck so far, the win rate is very high for what it is. There's really not much to this deck. A bunch of ramp, bunch of gates, Field of the Dead, Teferi, let's call it a day, right? But it turns out that is super effective against a lot of different strategies at time being. At present, it's a very, very good deck that, again, I got a ton of faith in. Now for power, yeah, I'm going to go all the way to 8 on this one. Not only do we have Field of the Dead, which has proven itself already to be one of the more powerful cards in the format, and that's not going to change, but we also have all the Gates package, which is worth some power, Teferi, all the power, Tamio, all the power, Hydroid Grazers, all the power, so yeah, I think it earns that 8. As far as the speed, really scratching a 3 there, almost a 2. Super high synergy. It is definitely the deck's strong suit. As far as versatility, kind of a lot of it, you know? We can take out a lot of different permanent types between Teferi and Gates Ablaze in this deck. We've even got ways of taking out the Planeswalkers, like swinging in with creatures. That's usually how we deal with that. But, you know, we've got Hydroid Grazers to draw a bunch of cards. Guild Summit draws a bunch of cards in this deck, so we can almost always find the answers we want. And if they're in our graveyard, we can just dig them out with Tamio. So we are very versatile in what we can deal with in this thing. Resiliency, also an insanely strong point for the deck. You know, we can, again, sweep the board multiple times over the course of a game and still come back and win from our own sweepers, but we don't care about the opponent's sweepers either. If cards go to the graveyard, again, we got ways of digging them out. Teferi, super resilient card that not only provides tempo, but gets the biggest threat off the table. We've got all of this card draw, again, provides resiliency. Hydroid Grazers gains us a bunch of life, resilience, Plaza of Harmony even, life, resilience. There's just a lot of ways to get deep into the game, and a lot more ways even than that to turn the corner once we do get deep. As far as offense, right around there with the speed. We'll give it a 2 because there's really not that many creatures in the deck, and what creatures we do have, like Arboreal Grazer for instance, aren't that great. Kind of the biggest shot in the deck is Hydroid Grazers and the single copy of Gate Colossus, but that doesn't really make for a good offense. We kind of don't care as much about defense as it might look, but that said, we're still carrying 4 main deck sweepers, so we're doing okay in the defense department, to say the least. As far as game 1, yeah, I'll give it an 8. I'll give it an 8, and this is not like an uncommon score for a very strong deck, and that's exactly what I think this is. That said, we're still fairly strong in game 2, because again, we do get a lot of tools in the Esper matchup and all the control matchups, but we also get another sweeper against aggro decks, so not dead in the water against them either. It's just we get a lot of help out of our board, but I think we're slightly stronger in game 1, mostly as a factor of surprise. But as far as consistency, we get an 8 in that category. We've got a lot of different ways to ramp our lands out. If the game goes long enough, then we've easily got procs all day for Field of the Dead. You know, what cards are really important to the deck, we play 4 of, and we have a ton of card draw available to us. So we are fairly consistent even with the myriad 1-ofs that we're playing. I want you to see some of these games, because with a deck like this, I think it's a lot easier to show you than to tell you. I think it's important to tell you and talk about all the different interactions and stuff that doesn't come up in this gameplay footage. But at the same time, this deck looks a little bit janky to some eyes, I would imagine. And me talking it up sounds like just that, talk. But this deck really needs to be seen. So I'm definitely going to upload at least 3 or 4 of those games, because we had some really, really good games too. And there was a game I was almost sure I was going to lose against a Sultai Field of the Dead deck that we actually ended up winning. That's the best game of Magic I ever played, or at least the best arena game I ever played by a lot. So I want to upload these games because there's some really wild stuff in there, and that's why you didn't see so many clips today, but either later on today or tomorrow, as early as that. Look out for these, because I'm going to be putting out a little bit more content on this deck, because that's how much I like this deck. If you're interested in it, then not only watch out for that content where I'm going to upload those games. But just click the first link in the description if you want to look at the deck list all in one place. I know it's kind of a lot to go over, especially with that ridiculous mana base. But if you want to look at it all in one place and save yourself another 25 minutes of watching some fat idiot run his mouth, then just click the first link in the description and go over to TCG Player. Get the deck for as cheap as you can possibly get it, because they're that, Jack. Usually I end up playing things a lot straighter than this. I'm just like, oh, it's a good deck, does some things, it's fine, I like it all right. But no, this time I'm putting all my chips in the bag. It's a good deck. It's a good deck, everybody. So again, interested, click that link. But at the very least, if you do this favor for me, if you made it this far, I presume you enjoy the content to some extent. So hit the like button, thumbs up my content, let YouTube know that you've enjoyed the thing. Also, subscribe if you haven't done that yet, because what are you waiting for? Also, you can check out the Patreon link in the description. Just throw me $1 a month. You'll be able to vote on what you want to see next, and that's going to be really important when it comes time for Throne of Eldraine season, and the hype is at peak levels, and you want to pick what decks you want to see. You're gonna wish you put that $1 in, so go ahead and do it. And I would really, really appreciate that. And I appreciate all my current patrons, too. I should say this more, Like, when I was a kid, 11, 12, 13, they used to play, like, the Magic World Championships on ESPN2, like, super late at night. And I was super jacked for it, and all I could think was, like, man, there needs to be, like, a Magic the Gathering show, like, on TV that we can watch, like, a couple of times a week. That would be amazing. It turns out that now I am that. Like, the whole reason I can be that is because I have patrons. Because, like, YouTube doesn't pay jack, so like, the whole reason I can even do this and now be what I wanted to exist in the first place 20 years ago is because of my patrons. So thank you to all of you who are patrons. So yeah, you guys are awesome. So I think that's all I got to say about this deck for now, though. Just let me know how you feel about it in the comments section, and how you change things, because this deck still, it's probably not in final form. So let me know any ideas you have. I really like Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, just throwing that out there for the time being. But anyway, let me know your ideas down there in the comments section, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.